Today we will talk about transforming ordinary scenes into something beautiful using cinematic lighting. We've all witnessed it. Groups of photographers coming together to shoot the same half-naked model against the backdrop of an unremarkable bush. Or studio photographers who, despite having access to a vintage room filled with scenic wonders, opt for the generic white wall for yet another crappy portrait series. And in many cases we've found ourselves in similar situations. In this video we want to make sure that we go outside this vicious circle by working properly with scenographic spaces. In my courses, one of the great methods of expanding your creative skill is to make an exercise of organizing impromptu sessions in the spaces you know extremely well. It's common for the environments we inhabit daily, whether it's our home or workplace, to appear mundane, ordinary and uninspiring at first glance. However, it's essential to realize that much of what we perceive as ordinary is an illusion created by our minds. There are some features of the space that are universally easy to get on with. Of course, it is not easy to work at home in a well-known space, but there are some tricks to ease the first encounters. In my teaching, I always use cinematic lighting concepts to address this. Studio lighting, while valuable in its own right, isn't universally applicable to most real-life scenic locations. That's why it is so hard for some experienced photographers to make use of the space, as they end up applying techniques that are effective in the studio but fall short in geometrically diverse environments. Let's get right down to the business. I will take you through two spaces that I am very familiar with. These spaces, by European standards, are quite ordinary, often cluttered and lack of obvious framing angles. I will use up to 3 lights for the setup and a hazer. I will use continuous lighting not only for the video's sake but for mine as well. Having continuous lighting allows me to observe and understand the nuances of the lighting in real time. So here's the first space that we'll be working with. It's a standard bachelor apartment spanning roughly 30 square meters. The bathroom is on the left. On the right we have a small kitchen that's partially open and connected with the living room, effectively serving as an office, storage and bedroom at the same time. This apartment does not have any additional storage space or garage, so the space has been made to be as utilitarian as possible. Unfortunately, it does not go well with being photogenic. It's really cluttered, which doesn't help, but that's the point. It should be an exercise, not the actual session that we want to win the competition with. From the start we can see that the kitchen will not serve as a good space for photos. It is a bit too small, just a few square meters, and it would just serve as a photographic backdrop, not the three-dimensional scenery that we want. Even if it was a beautiful vintage kitchen with ample space, we need geometrical features of the scene that create depth, leading lines and possible multiple plans. We'll also not be using the bathroom for the session, mostly because YouTube does not like such topics, so let's go into the all-in-one room. Here we can see the space segmented into utilitarian microspaces. Half of it is essentially a large bed, with a corner dedicated to a wannabe musician and another corner serving as a nerd-infested workstation, presumably for an IT student who enjoys watching anime in his spare time. No idea who that would be. In fact, anything resembling a corner should raise a red flag. The internet is full of images that utilize such photographic corners. Even photo studios often revolve around small, cramped spaces where you can place the model and use the corner as a background. This approach lacks depth. It stifles creativity and dictates that the photographic subject, such as the model, must always be in the foreground of the photo. Frankly, if the space consisted only of such photographic corners, I would simply opt out of doing the session. It's not worth your time or money. Of course, the last comment reflects only my opinion, which is mainly shaped by the type of photography I do. This particular exercise is all about working with the space and challenging yourself to drastically change your perspective in search for the best starting point for the photoshoot. If you're aiming for fashion photography with a wide-angle lens and close perspective, you should seek exercises that better align with that type of photography. The advice provided in this video isn't about dictating how photography should be done, but rather about demonstrating how you can leverage your skills to unlock new levels in your photography campaign. Going back to our apartment. If you find yourself going around the room looking for a nice corner to set up the shoot like this dork here, ask yourself, are you perhaps already inside the scene that you want to photograph? And if you are, try to go outside of that space. Look for any exit or passage that cuts across the space. Sometimes this means stepping outside of the apartment and viewing it from the balcony or through a window. The greater the depth of the scene, the more compression and planes you can utilize for the shoot. It may even limit your point of view to really one direction, but then you can use the whole time of the session to work with your model in that particular framing. Please remember that in artistic photography, often the only thing that matters is the best photo you've taken. Nobody cares how many angles you've captured or how much disk space you've used during a session. Of course, you may want to change the framing if you didn't find a single perfect scene that gives you confidence in winning a competition. And honestly, I didn't find it here either. It's not easy to find any obviously good frame here. The bed is plain. The axis from the balcony doors to the kitchen adds some depth, but looks terrible, so I decided to explore the last option, pointing my camera from the entry doors towards the balcony. The white wall and the ugly window blinds dominate most of the image, but I believe we can minimize the impact with better lighting. Notice that the current top-down lamps are extremely unflattering for photography, and you should never judge the space solely by existing light. Despite the unsatisfactory backdrop, we have part of the bed in the middle and a kitchen ledge on the right, creating more depth. A mirror on the left on the wardrobe can be used to limit your field of view, so the viewer has no idea what the rest of the room looks like. Such perceptual black holes are great places to accommodate your lighting gear. And now let's focus on the lighting setup. I will place a single spotlight on the balcony and use it to backlight the space on the bed. I will close 2 of the 3 available blinds. The hard backlight will create visible textures and contours around objects in the center of our scene. Additionally, I will ensure that none of the light sources directly illuminates the white wall in the background. I want it to be as invisible as possible. That's why I will also use haze as an additional means to hide many aesthetic problems with this room. During lighting setups, I often use a lot of haze, mainly to see the light cones produced by the lamps. This may be one of few tricks with haze that makes setting up lights easier for people not used to continuous lighting. At last I added a small flex light with grid on the left as a side fill and low proximity soft light for the model, as I presume that I will mostly use the space in front of the bed. You can see that the character of the lighting is produced mostly by the backlight, so I am knowingly limiting myself to work in one direction with the camera. Here you can see that even the bedding starts to look flat when viewed from the side. With the light setup and the camera position decided, it's time to consider the furniture in the room. In my sessions, I've often rearranged the entire room during these exercises to ensure that the framing works best. However, in this case, there aren't many possible changes. I only moved the plant stands to provide more variety in objects throughout the depth of the scene. I avoided placing anything beside the back wall because they draw attention to the background. The room predominantly features browns, oranges, reds and clay-like colors, so I used warm light in the back and neutral feel from the side. This room has also a projector on the ceiling. I turned it on to see if I could incorporate it into my photos, but unfortunately its beam angle is too steep to create a very good image. If you have a projector at your disposal and can move it freely in the room, I recommend playing a bit with it, as it can be used in many interesting ways. I've created a bit theatrical lighting setup for this room, which may seem over the top, but that's okay because we haven't used any practicals yet. Practicals refer to the light sources that are already in the scene and are part of the set design. Most living spaces have some floor or desk lamps that can be used to spice up the nighttime environment, but you can sometimes use them even in the scenes set during the middle of the day, as long as they don't look out of the place. I said that most living spaces have lamps, because this one doesn't. Not even one movable source of light, only these terrible ceiling lights. So I brought 2 lamps with me, and that's the advice for you as well. It's always good to have practicals in the trunk of your car. In my current setup it would be quite challenging to position the lights in places that feel natural and obvious, so I opted for a completely fairy tale and artistic touch. I left a lot of haze in the room and placed 2 lights close to the bed, intending to even use one of them in interaction with the model. I've installed bicolor LED light bulbs in them and set them to a warm cast with low output. With the setup complete, it's time to begin the session. But before that, let's provide some context. I am a scenographic and fine art photographer who occasionally teaches scenographic lighting and photography in my workshops. To move beyond the surface level of learning by trial and error, certain conditions must be set by us. The first thing is a mindset that we want to learn, and that's very hard in photography as many of us automatically prioritize capturing a lot of images and meeting clients' or models' expectations. However, the learning mindset means that you outright accept that the photos may suck. Your experience of the photoshoot may suck as well. The thing is that you must organize your sessions so you have specific time for this whole sucking to learn stuff. If you want organized sessions for the sole reason of expanding your skill, you may hit the glass ceiling very soon after starting to do any commercially viable stuff. And believe me, you do not need a lot of skill to be paid for, so the temptation not to progress further is real. Everyone can fall into the trap of repetitive commercial work, generic studio-only online courses and just mere fear of the unknown. It's hard to try to make mistakes again, even if it means opening the doors to new levels in your career. Returning to the session. This is typically the moment when I invite the models and actors into the scene for the first time, and my focus shifts entirely to the photography aspects. Starting the session becomes easier knowing that a lot of groundwork has already been done. I'm aware of which angles and focal ranges will work best for this session, how the lights interact with the space and where to find the best shots. Since this is a practice session, there was no prior conceptual preparation, there were no plans for makeup, hair, styling or any other elements of the photo session that could compete for my attention during the shoot. As you can see, I did the whole session afterwards, meaning that even though I chose specific frames beforehand, I went inside the scene and improvised, as I would normally do during the impromptu session. And it wasn't easy by any means. The lighting was still a bit rushed for my standards, and finding frames where the background would not be distracting was a daunting task. Nonetheless, sessions like these can sensitize you to problematic elements in the scene, allowing you to address them in future sessions. Overall, this session served its purpose as a practice run. While the photos may not make it into my portfolio because they are not particularly outstanding, the experience gained is what truly matters. I say this because it is not always the case that you will arrive at scenes worth doing the sessions. While the learning process is worth your time, performing the actual session in conditions where you are certain the photos will not meet your standards may be bad for your morale and even hinder your skills. Now we will go into another apartment and I will try to keep the same approach as in the first space. All the setups that you will see here were made in less than an hour to show you how little time such workshops can require. You can literally complete this exercise faster than your average gym visit. And just like with gym visits, you may not see the effects after just one session. This apartment presents quite a challenge in terms of composition and available space. It's less than 50 square meters, with 2 bedrooms, a single bathroom and kitchen connected with living room area. Much space is taken by useless corridors, and the bedrooms are tiny and narrow. The only space big enough to do some photography work is the living room, and that's not a spacious place to be. Long narrow room, with white walls and white furniture, which may be necessary to maximize the limited light from the balcony window, but it is a kill switch for any nighttime and moody lighting setups that we planned here. In such a narrow space, where light bounces everywhere, lighting becomes extremely challenging. It requires a lot of flags, negative fills and proper cinematic setups to make it usable. So really, if I had to, I would rather try to make some clean light, low contrast beauty portraits in this space, and maybe the space would not be a handicap for that. The living room area, along with the corridor, forms a T-shaped space. We have 2 axes and 3 directions in which we can work with acceptable range. So let's quickly light these spaces from these 3 directions and see what we get. First, we will start with a shot from the corridor at the table with chairs. In the nighttime lighting, it looks just decent. I've added soft light from the kitchen side and placed a floor lamp in the frame, which adds a nice touch. At this point I would stop and try to work with the model and stable position in the frame, as I like such clean and simple setups. However, for the purpose of this video I will attempt to simulate similar setups to the first apartment. So I added a spotlight on the left and introduced a bit of haze. It's worth noting that haze in white well-lit rooms doesn't always work seamlessly, because it can merge the white wall with the subject's shadows. Experimentation is the key to finding the right balance or deciding when not to use haze at all. In this case, haze is in fact not necessary, and the spotlight on the left should be rather used to bounce some light into model's face and fill the shadows. However, the clean and light characteristics of this frame is quite nice if you see from the beginning that you should go for this kind of looks. This highlights the importance of understanding the space and identifying which types of sessions work best with it. Not all spaces are inherently photogenic, and even the most beautiful ones aren't universally suited for all types of photography. Even though this cinematic framing with corridor leading to the models is nice, the space itself lacks interest, and if you try to attempt a full photo session going inside the scene, you would feel many distractions around. The corridor isolated the only coherent part of the space, so the framing from afar just works. Let's go to another setup. A frame from the kitchen in the direction of the balcony. I put a spotlight with minimal output outside the window and use blinds to simulate the street lamp. And here starts the problems. The other soft light that I've got have minimum 10% output. That is still too bright and it will fill the whole room, destroying the nighty, low-key mood. Despite attempting to use practical lights and light from the TV, I couldn't achieve the desired effect without proper cinematic grip hardware and lighting. Even if I adjusted the placement of the sofa closer to the TV to add depth to the framing, the limited space would still be a challenge for a full photo session. So without the proper hardware to light the models and space, and with mundane saloon working only for film-like shots, I quickly changed to the last direction. I framed the shot through the balcony door towards the kitchen, aiming to limit the visible space to the sofa and table area. I set up a single practical soft light from the right and spotlight making contours for the model. The image now looks better, and if I were to do whole session, I think I could do some decent shots with model's interaction, making up for the non-ideal surroundings. Unfortunately, I would still face limitations when changing the framing, as the white wall would become a dual background when viewed from other angles. So, today we've seen how can you make your first steps in your cinematic photography, or just perform the exercise to develop your photography skills in non-studio environments. I hope it was worth watching and you will make use of it in your photographic journey. Don't subscribe if you didn't like this video, but if you do, next up will be the portrait sessions with the cheapest lighting hardware you can get nowadays. Let's check if DIY lighting have any sense anymore. See you soon!